All right, joining us with the very latest from Washington is SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce. Peace, Sherwin. Heated session at the White House. President Ramaphosa there holding his own, very diplomatic in his response to statement by President Donald Trump, even when a surprise was sprung on them with the videos, specifically the one of Kill the Boer. Just talk us through what we saw a bit earlier on insofar as those exchanges in the Oval Office.
Well, I think South Africans got a first-hand look at what it's like to be within the Trump vortex. And I think one comparison would be the chaos you saw in the Oval Office has been emblematic about how this administration is run. Executive orders are signed and it gets filtered down to departments that need to implement stuff they were not apprised of before Donald Trump's signature goes on that executive order. So there was a lot of chaos, a lot of shouting, a jockeying for position among the journalists. I think it surprised the South African delegation. Initially, there was a program that was agreed between both presidential teams. The president was to arrive. Donald Trump was supposed to meet President Ramaphosa at the door as he got out of his vehicle. He was supposed to sign a visitor's book. They were supposed to go in with both delegations to have lunch and discuss some of the pressing issues, among that trade and investment, geopolitical concerns, Gaza and Ukraine, and all sorts of other issues, including the vexing issues, right? Like the allegation of Afrikaner genocide being perpetrated as policy by the South African government. And what you saw from the South African delegation ahead of this meeting was a very positive posture. The fact that they didn't want to really deal or feel there was it necessitated dealing with the Afrikaner refugee issue because they believe it is untrue. They believe it is not government policy. There is no genocide in South Africa. So let's deal with that, so that we can get that out of the way to deal with the pressing issues that are in the main around economic development in South Africa, the trade relationship with the United States, a $20 billion trade relationship that has happened within the framework of AGOA. But of course, the concern is that if AGOA is not renewed, then what takes its place? Do you have something, a deal, new prospects, minerals in the main? What does that relationship look like on a bilateral level if the multilateral fora that is the African Growth and Opportunity Act goes away? That's not what happened in the Oval Office. We very much the signature theme is going to be, certainly from the US perspective, and certainly what played out live on television screens was this issue of the killing of white Afrikaners, white people in the main in South Africa. And as much as there was poised pushback from the president talking about South Africa's constitutional democracy, I don't think he was able to penetrate the wall that surrounds Donald Trump's thinking around this issue. At one point, they dimmed the lights and played, the words of minority opposition parties in South Africa, including the EFF and Umkhonto we Sizwe. And Ramaphosa tried to very calmly say that, this is not government policy. Trump then asked him if you denounce these kinds of things. He even floated the idea of arresting people who say things that EFF leader Julius Malema has said. But as you well understand, South Africa has laws and legislation and a lot of levity for parliamentarians, particularly within the House, to say what is on their minds. So, Mfundo, you and I are going to have a conversation now about, what was the focus? There was no focus. It was a free-for-all, and it's become synonymous with those meetings in the Oval Office. You invite a visiting delegation led by a president or a prime minister, and that's what played itself out on live television.
And I suppose a number of analysts now will look, as the days progress, they'll look to see if perhaps this manner of unsettling the guests is not part of the art of the deal here, where you unsettle your guests and then you're going to have a lot of concessions, because even many analysts that we're speaking to now saying there were missed opportunities on the part of South Africa to really almost clarify this whole narrative around a white genocide. But if you're caught off guard and you're literally ambushed, you don't get that opportunity. And then what happens is that that false narrative will prevail.
Yeah, but what does pushback really look like, and what are the implications of that pushback? Do you then get a Volodymyr Zelensky scenario, which would have undermined what the South African delegation sought to achieve in this meeting, right? This was a long awaited, long struggled for engagement with the United States after an executive order, after the ambassador Ibrahim Rasool was expelled here. This was a fraught relationship to begin with, and so they didn't want to exacerbate what was already a poisoned chalice. They wanted to make this better. They wanted to wipe the blade and start afresh. Remember, the South African presidency framed this entire meeting as a reset of the bilateral relationship. That might still be the case, but they certainly did not circumvent the issue of white Afrikaner. That was front and center in this discussion, if you can call it that, and it's going to dominate the headlines moving forward. The question is, what did they discuss in post that Oval Office meeting? They went and had lunch. We understand now that the president is back here at his hotel. It's set up here for a press conference now with the South African delegation. We understand that the president is just regrouping upstairs and will come down to have a discussion. And there are going to be a lot of questions from the gathered South African media here about what does this relationship now look like going forward. You had Johan Rupert in the room. You had Ernie Els in the room. They too had an opportunity to speak, seeking to convince the US president that perhaps what he says is not true. But what does that look like in terms of the policy persuasion that South Africa is seeking in its relationship now with the United States? And we'll hear from the president, and we understand that possibly some of his ministers will join. Park Starr was in the room. Park Starr was sitting there. Ronald Lamola was sitting there. Kombutso and Chabeni were sitting there, and I can tell you they had perplexed looks on their faces. No one, do not let the South African delegation tell you that they were happy with how things went. They were surprised at how the chips were shifted on the board right at the beginning. The program that they had agreed to was not followed, and so they recalibrated and they went with the flow. The question is, did they achieve what they came here to achieve, what they set out to achieve? And that's a question only the president can answer.
Most certainly, that is the question we all want answered. But it seemed as though, Sherwin, the theme also became around crime, where there were concessions made, that most of Team South Africa did concede that there is a problem with crime. When it came to Johan Rupert, in as much as he touched on the element of kill the Boer and what Julius Malema had stated, he also went on to state that we do need assistance when it comes to crime. We need the modern technologies, but also touched on the need for entities such as Starlink to come to South Africa.
Look, one of the initial takeaways from all these members of the South African delegation that spoke was that they were seeking partnership with the United States. You heard that from the president, you heard that from Retief Goosen, you heard that from Ernie Els, you heard that from Johan Rupert, and that was exactly what you were referring to there in terms of Johan Rupert's request for investment in terms of drones, capacitating rural police stations, talking about rural crime in the main. That is emblematic of what you see in terms of Afrikaner deaths, perhaps on farms, but also the point made that black workers are also killed on that farms. Yeah. Then also, I think a powerful moment was when Zingiswa Losi, the president of COSATU, spoke, and she made a comparison. She used an example about an old grandmother that is perhaps also a victim of crime. Her throat slit, she said, raped multiple times, and I think that really impressed. Donald Trump sat in silence as she spoke, and I think that really impressed and brought back, certainly landed a punch, if you will, in terms of the fact that crime in South Africa is not race specific. And there are many examples. In fact, black people in the main are by far the greater victims of crime in South Africa. But there is a crime problem that needs to be addressed. And what you heard from the South African delegation is that we'd like to partner with you, your technological expertise, your policing expertise. Let us share, let us partner so that we can address this issue. But it is not a genocide.
Mm-hmm. Sherwin, we'll leave it there for now and touch base with you when the second session, open session, is there now for further interaction. Thank you very much. That is Sherwin Bryce, piece coming to us from Washington.